Hi there, welcome to Comp 382. This is the introduction module. This is going to be quite a bit longer than the other modules because I have to introduce a lot of things. So I'm going to often encourage you to hit the pause button so that you can maybe take a break or stop in your notes and check if you had out everything. So for example, here's the module outline. If you want to pause, you can write this in your notes so that you can be prepared for the different topics that we're going to cover. You can do this on every module if you want. With that, I'm going to go ahead and to talk about ways of knowing. So there are many different ways that we know things. These are different methods that we use to gain knowledge about the world. There are many different ways of knowing, even beyond the ones I'm going to talk about today, and all of them have different strengths and weaknesses. Understanding the way that we know things can help you better understand the world around you and maybe make some more informed decisions. So let me talk about this first one. Tradition. So this is the beliefs and practices that are passed down from generation to generation, like cultural traditions, religious traditions, and scientific traditions. This way of knowing relies on the idea that knowledge and wisdom that accumulated over time can be trusted because it's been around forever. It's true because it's always been true. So this graphic shows you kind of a funny example. In the US and Canada, on the Thanksgiving holiday, traditionally, people eat turkey. It's just something that people do, eat turkey. And so this product is called Tofurkey, and it is made from tofu, and it's for vegans and vegetarians or people that just don't want to eat turkey, I guess, that they can, on Thanksgiving, still engage in this tradition of eating turkey without actually eating turkey meat. From my personal experience, this doesn't taste great, in my opinion. But it's because this idea that it is a tradition to do this thing that has to continue on. So while it is the case that definitely things that have always been true are often true, this also can perpetuate misconceptions and doesn't always leave room for new ideas. So another way of knowing is authority, and this is the belief that knowledge is based on the opinions and decisions of people with expertise or that are in positions of power, that because they have gone to school or they have a particular skill or they know something because they've done it for a long time, they have some specialized knowledge or experience, that they're more likely to be correct than other people are. So your doctor tells you to do something, your mom tells you to do something, a fitness trainer at the gym tells you to do a particular exercise, that we've decided that that person is an expert, and because they said it's true, therefore it's true. So this is great until it isn't, because sometimes people can not have expertise, or people with expertise can be wrong. But in general, this is a way of knowing that we engage in quite a bit. Intuition is another way of knowing, and this is gained through feelings and direct experiences rather than through using reason or logic. This way of knowing is often considered very subjective and personal, but it is true that it can provide valuable insights into things. So a common phrase in English is a mother's intuition, that somehow a mother just knows something. Other examples of this are people will say, listen to your intuition, listen to your gut. You see someone or you're dating someone and you feel inside, you're like, there's something off about this person, there's some red flags. And it's true in life that listening to your gut and your intuition in these cases is actually a good idea. So even though it doesn't use logic and reason, that doesn't mean it's a bad way to know things. Another way of knowing is through direct experience or observation. This is how we engage with the world. It's often considered a very reliable way of knowing things because it's based on firsthand observation. So you go outside, your jacket is wet, and you say, well, I know it's raining because the raindrops are dropping on my jacket. That's a very good way of knowing something. But in another case, imagine you're in a classroom and someone walks in and their jacket is wet. Maybe it's because it's raining, but maybe they walked through sprinklers, or maybe a bucket of water got dumped on them. So that firsthand experience is very reliable. Indigenous ways of knowing are very similar to traditional ways of knowing. This is traditional knowledge and beliefs that are passed down generation to generation amongst people that identify as Indigenous. This is a way of knowing that's centered often around an understanding of the environment, people, animals, plants, and the natural world that are all related to each other. Some Indigenous communities believe that animals and objects and plants know things and should be respected as creators of knowledge. That's what makes it different than just plain old traditional ways of knowing. And that this is a big part of a lot of Indigenous people's lives and Indigenous communities, that this respect of knowledge of the earth. The scientific method, this is a way of knowing that you probably learned in middle school or in high school or even elementary school. And I have this graphic here that sort of looks like a poster that might be in a school classroom. This is an approach to acquiring and knowing knowledge that's based in the natural sciences like biology and chemistry, etc., and came to be applied to the social world. But the social world is very complex and varied compared to the physical and biological sciences. But we still use the basic ideas about hypotheses, experimenting to test hypotheses, gathering data, analyzing data, and we're going to talk about this quite a bit in this class. So the scientific method is objective and based in logic, that there is a theory or model that makes sense according to rules of logic, that we make predictions based on theories, that there is an idea that openness matters, and that methods are documented very clearly and available for others to review and potentially replicate. And replication is the idea that other people, if they did the exact same thing you did based on the processes that you wrote down, could come up with the exact same result that you did. You might remember from school, everyone doing the same little experiment and hopefully coming up with the same result. Scientific method also is characterized by skepticism. Researchers scrutinize and critique others' work and their own, searching for any alternate explanations and shortcomings. And this means that it's very hard to publish scientific research because there's so much criticism involved. And we'll talk about this in future modules. Science has four main characteristics. One is that there's a goal of producing knowledge in the form of a theory, and a theory is just an interconnected set of logically related propositions that explain something about how the world works. There's also, second, a reliance on verifiable data, that the researcher can back up their claims with their data, and others will as well, and that you should be able, if you look at someone's data, to be able to verify the claims they make because you have the same finding. There's a use of systematic procedures in data collection and analysis, and that logical reasoning is used to generate and test scientific knowledge. So if you want to pause here, you can. The next thing I'm going to talk about is two main forms of logical reasoning. So, forms of logical reasoning. Deductive and inductive. So deductive and inductive logic are important to understand when you're designing and conducting research because they will often determine the approach you take in designing your research and testing your hypotheses. So deductive logic starts with a general statement or hypothesis and then derives specific predictions from that. If the predictions are confirmed, then the original hypothesis is considered supported. So, for example, if our hypothesis is all birds can fly, then we can deductively reason that a specific bird, like a robin, can fly. If it's a bird, it can fly. If that robin is observed to fly, our hypothesis is supported. If the robin is observed not to fly, our hypothesis is not supported. Inductive logic, on the other hand, starts with specific observations and then formulates a more general statement or hypothesis. For example, if we see a bunch of different birds, robins, crows, sparrows, eagles, and we see them all flying, then we inductively reason all birds can fly because we saw all those different kinds of birds flying. This type of reasoning is often used in exploratory research where the goal is to generate new ideas or explanations based on observation. So both deductive and inductive reasoning can be used in research and sometimes even combined. Deductive reasoning is very helpful when you're testing well-established theories, whereas inductive is good for new ideas. So again, deductive is all birds can fly, is where we start. If we see a robin flying, hypothesis is supported. Inductive is, I saw a bunch of different kinds of birds flying, so therefore I'm pretty sure that all birds can fly. So to look at this in a little different way, with deductive, we're starting from theory, then to hypotheses, then to data. Whereas inductive, we start with data, we see some patterns, and then we go to theory. Inductive goes from concrete to abstract. Deductive goes from abstract to concrete. If you want to pause here, I'm going to move on to talking about what research is. So research always starts with a question. Somebody has a desire to find an answer to some question. At the heart of all research is really questions and answers. Research is systematic, it's planned, it's orderly, and it proceeds in a careful step-by-step process. Research should be replicable. Like I mentioned earlier, research should be able to be reproduced by others as long as they look at the same systematic step-by-step process notes. Research is self-critical. People themselves will look to see if there's any flaws or any challenges or any limitations in their research study, and they talk about them. And you'll see when you start reading research studies that people openly talk about challenges in their research and limitations and what they could have done better, what they'll do differently next time. It's an important part of science. Research is cumulative, that there is a shared history of research that starts with older studies, that you build on older studies. You don't just come up with something brand new, and that you hope that in the future people will build on your study. Research is also cyclical. Research ends up back where it started. New questions always emerge from existing research processes. Research comes in a lot of different forms. We're going to talk about a bunch of them today and throughout this course. And research is never perfect. All research types, all research methods, all research studies have strengths and weaknesses, and we acknowledge them. Research is also quite uncertain. Research studies are rarely definitive. Research studies are like bits and pieces of a larger puzzle, and any single study is just one little part of evidence. You're never going to hear someone say, yes, I cured cancer, or now I totally understand what's going on with kids and watching violent cartoons and them behaving violently. It's all little bits and pieces. Research also involves competition and criticism. As I mentioned, researchers are examining and criticizing their own work and others. There's also two different types of research. Basic research that's often motivated just by curiosity and interest in producing and theorizing knowledge. Applied research, on the other hand, seeks to solve real-world practical problems. Social justice research is focused expressly on challenging imbalances in power, position, and privilege, and the conditions that produce those imbalances. The research process involves first formulating research questions, then designing, then collecting data, and then analyzing and interpreting. And every method we'll talk about in this class is going to cover those topics. Research methods focus on producing knowledge that helps us understand the world around us and include the techniques and procedures that produce research evidence, such as sampling strategies, how we measure things, how we compare things, and statistical techniques. So, why do research methods matter? Why are you in this class? Well, the best methods win. That's not to say that certain kinds of methods are better than others, but imagine if two people were trying to make an argument about the same thing. If one person has used more meticulous and careful methods, their evidence is considered better. And so it's important to have solid research methods in order to make the strongest case. Research savvy people matter. It's important for you as people in society to understand how research is created. Familiarity with research methods is really important to a lot of different jobs, research analytic jobs, marketing jobs. There's going to be research involved in almost every kind of job you're going to encounter. Also, there's a lot of information out there, and so being able to assess its credibility is important. Also, in our society and in all societies, misinformation is a big problem, and being able to understand how evidence is produced is a really essential skill. Becoming a more critical consumer of research allows you to read and understand research studies, including medical research studies, so you're not relying upon other people to tell you what they say. It can help you evaluate the quality of information and determine if information is credible or not. Also, maybe in the future, you can become your own producer of research. You could do a research study as an honors project in your senior year. You could go on to graduate school and do research. You could become a researcher in a career, and so this is just the start of that. I'm now going to talk about 4 different kinds of approaches to social scientific research. I'm going to talk about each of them a little bit in this module, but we'll be covering them quite a bit more in the future. Most of this class is going to address quantitative research. This is research that focuses on measuring variables, testing hypotheses, and explaining relationships and differences between different variables. This is really focused on numerical data, categorizing data, and really emphasizes objectivity, deductive reasoning, representativeness, making sure that your data is really saying what you say it says, and generalizability of findings, that the arguments that you're making can apply to other situations, not just your little research study. Survey research, experimental research, and content analysis are types of quantitative research that we'll talk about in this class. Some features of quantitative social science research, like I said, testing relationship amongst or comparing between measured variables. Sometimes it's descriptive, but that's pretty boring. Deductive reasoning will be used. Close-ended questions will be used that will produce numerical data. You'll be doing statistical analyses, and you're never going to start a quantitative social scientific research study from scratch. You're going to draw on existing literature. That means older studies, and you're going to integrate your data into past findings. Generalizing to other populations is highly desirable, that you can say, yeah, I studied these people, but it would also work in other people. Determining cause and effect is the gold standard. Not all quantitative social scientific research does this, but it is what people prefer. And that there's a strong emphasis on objectivity, that you're trying to minimize the role that the researcher's own value systems, feelings, opinions, etc. play in impacting the research. One example that we'll be talking about soon are experiments. These are always quantitative and involve statistical analyses. There's often a manipulation, that's the thing that changes, and a control, that's the thing that does not change. They are ideal for studying the causes of human behavior because you're isolating everything but the thing that you want to understand. So for example, in this picture, it's the same picture of this person, but in one I photoshopped glasses onto this person. So I could go and ask people using one of these pictures, how attractive do you think this person is? And then I could take the other picture with glasses and say, how attractive do you think this person is? And because everything else in the picture is the same except the glasses, I can argue that the cause of the different score of attractiveness is because of the glasses or the absence of the glasses. Downside of this, it's limited to what can be manipulated, and it could also seem fake if it's not really done well. So if I do this in a laboratory setting, that's not the same as being out on the street and judging someone as attractive or not, because you're being asked and it seems sort of not real. So we'll be talking about this quite a bit in a future module. Surveys are another quantitative method that you probably are familiar with from doing course evaluations or just taking surveys generally. It involves asking questions of a relatively large, often randomly selected group of people, and then doing statistical analyses to estimate what group characteristics would be. Downsides, though, sometimes people are not truthful, and what they say may not predict what they actually do. And this is especially the case in political election campaign surveys when people are asked who they're going to vote for. Who they say they're going to vote for and who they actually vote for don't often match up anymore. And we'll talk a lot about this coming up. I'm not going to talk about content analysis today, but this will be another area we'll cover. Qualitative research is sort of the opposite end from quantitative research because instead of focusing on numbers, it's focusing on subjective experiences and meaning making to understand and describe social phenomena. It uses an inductive approach most of the time where the theory is built from the data, and it's very flexible, and this includes focus groups, interviews, thematic analysis, and observational studies. Within qualitative social science research, it is focusing on this individual meaning, and it's subjective. People have ideas about what things that they've experienced mean to them, and when they're telling a researcher about them, it's only an approximate meaning. It cares way more about how and why rather than cause. Qualitative research doesn't care about generalizability. It doesn't care about those research findings also applying to other populations. But it does care about transferability. I want the qualitative findings of my research to matter to other researchers. It uses open-ended questions and people's answers are not limited, and it tries to collect data in a naturalistic setting that the participant exists in. As I mentioned before, it uses an inductive approach. Sampling is purposeful or theoretical, which we'll be talking about in a future module. And really it has a goal to have this rich, meaningful understanding. And qualitative researchers believe that by talking to and watching people, we can learn about their lived experiences. And sometimes observing things may be the only way to get to that knowledge. Mixed methods research combines different methods, often quantitative and qualitative, but not always, into a single project with a goal of triangulation. And triangulation is the idea that if you study something from different perspectives, the answers that you come up with are more valid than a single study. So for example, when I was in graduate school, we did a study that we were trying to understand why middle school kids weren't putting stuff in the recycling bin. They were putting things that should be recycled into the trash bin. So we did some focus groups where we talked to middle school students about recycling and not recycling and what was going on. So that was one study. But then we also took the school recycling bins and trash bins and we dumped them. We flipped them over. We wore hazmat suits, so it wasn't so gross, although it was a little gross. And we went through the bins and figured out what was going into the trash bins of these middle schoolers. So you could argue that by doing those two different studies, that our answers about why are middle school kids not recycling were stronger than either study alone. Community-based research is research that is done with community partnerships and collaboration, not just by researchers. So in that study that I just talked about, that was actually a study that we did in collaboration with the city and the section of the city government that dealt with trash and recycling, because they had determined that schools were a big problem for stuff that should go into the recycling bin not going into the recycling bin. It was costing the city a lot of money because that stuff should have gone to recycling. And so our research team partnered with the city to do this research together. So that's community-based research. Okay, you can pause here if you need to take a break. The next thing I'm going to talk about is research paradigms. So research paradigms are what shapes a researcher's view of how the world works. It's the set of assumptions about the world that impact the variables people choose, the methods that they choose, the way that they explain things. Paradigms to me are a lot like religion, that paradigms shape the way that someone thinks about the world. And like religion, the one that you learned about earlier in life, or if you're a researcher earlier in your career, is kind of the one that is dominant in your brain. And even if later in life you change paradigms or change religions, or you don't have a religion or you don't have a paradigm, there's going to be things that are in your mind because it was the first one you learned that are really impact the way that you encounter information. So there are different paradigms than the ones I'm going to talk about today, but these are the main ones that we see in the social sciences and in communication. The positivist paradigm is a paradigm that's very close to natural sciences like chemistry and biology, and involves generating predictions in the form of hypotheses and then gathering data to test the hypotheses. And this is going to always be deductive. So this is very, very much like the hard sciences. The post-positivistic paradigm is the same idea that hypotheses and deductive reasoning are used. However, post-positivist acknowledge that the scientific method has some limitations and that there's not this single one answer that has to be discovered, and acknowledges that a researcher's subjectivity and their own values are going to influence the research process. And to be honest with you, now in this era, most people would describe themselves as post-positivistic, not just positivist, in their approach to the world. Constructivists consider multiple realities and meanings that are built from a ton of different experiences and interpretations. They do not believe that there's a single truth out there that needs to be discovered by a researcher. This is often tied to qualitative research and often uses an inductive perspective. The critical paradigm is a paradigm that the critique of power and privilege is at the center of the research inquiry, and that research in the critical paradigm is always going to be concerned with oppression, injustice, and inequality. This does not mean that people in other paradigms also can't be concerned about power, oppression, etc., and in fact they often are. But within the critical paradigm, it is at the center of everything that is thought about within the paradigm.